So we are so excited. This is our fifth CLP call this year, and most excited because it's with our wonderful friends in Los Angeles County. Going to be having another What Works showcase on youth diversion in Los Angeles County. And we have three presenters. We have Vincent Holmes, the principal analyst for the Los Angeles County Chief Executive Office. And just confirming that I'm pronouncing your name correctly, Refugio Valle.
Refugio.
Valle, sorry about that.
All good.
The director, Los Angeles County Division of Youth Diversion and Development. And also we have our friend Taylor, the senior research and policy manager for the Los Angeles County Division of Youth Diversion and Development. And we are so excited to have the three of you here with us today. So just to recap the sort of point of our conversation today, Los Angeles County, of course, is home to the largest juvenile justice system in the nation, and youth of color are disproportionately arrested in that community. So in November 2017, LA County adopted a new comprehensive model of youth diversion that seeks to effectively and equitably connect young people across the county with individualized community-based services in lieu of arrest and citation. So today, we will be exploring the innovative models, strategies, and tactics that have been adopted by local stakeholders in LA County, and our presenters will be leading us through that conversation. So before we get started, just a quick housekeeping note. Just wanted to confirm with everybody that Cecilia and I will be connecting with folks in the chat box, but also hoping that unless you are speaking or responding to our presenters, that you keep your lines on mute so that we can make sure that this conversation is good to go for future sharing with folks. And with no further ado, I'm passing it over to our presenters to lead us through their presentation.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jared. And hello, everyone. It's so exciting to see everyone's chats come through in the chat box. I am honored. I think we're all honored to connect with all of you. And we, have a presentation prepared, but really would love to dialogue as much as possible. If you guys have questions, we are none of us fans of rules or following rules here, so just let us know, and we're happy to chat with any of you guys. So I think the way we'll start, Jared just introduced us very kindly and beautifully, but we might give each of us, me, Vincent, and Refugio, a little bit more information about who we are, to help sort of ground why we're talking about the work in the way that we are. So I can start. My name is Taylor Schooley. I am, as Jared said, I'm the research and policy manager for Los Angeles County's relatively new Office of Youth Diversion and Development. But my background, my training is in public health research and evaluation. So I come to this work really from a sort of practice and policy grounded research perspective. And my interests really are thinking about how data, in sort of the broadest, most holistic definition of the term, how data and evidence, local data, national data, the evidence created by just talking to one another and learning from experience, how that can really inform what we do together, really inform collaboration and collaborative planning. So that's a little bit about me.
Hi everyone, my name is Refugio Valle, and I'm the director of the Division of Youth Diversion Development. My background, I'm a social worker by training. I spent the previous 7 years of my life here in the City of LA's Mayor's Office, helping to run their gang reduction and youth development program. So running youth gang prevention, gang intervention programs in the City of LA. And before that, I've also done a few years of work in the nonprofit sector, working as both case manager and a program coordinator / mentor with youth and programs down in Orange County. So I have a decent sense of what it takes working directly with youth and families based on that experience in terms of creating programs that are really successful, that really meet the needs of youth, and that engage parents in a meaningful way. So I bring that experience along with my experience at the city in terms of administering this type of program, building relationships and partnerships with other government entities, particularly law enforcement, which can be daunting challenge for folks, but can also be really fruitful as we work to create change.
So I'll sort of round it off. My name is Vincent Holmes. I'm with the CEO's office, LA County Chief Executive Office, and I coordinate the county's MBK efforts. And it's important to note that in LA County, we have about 5 or 6 other jurisdictions, city jurisdictions that also have MBK jurisdictions who are doing incredible work as well. And we partner with when we have at every opportunity. I've been the MBK coordinator for about 3 or 4 years. Prior to that, I was sort of involved with most of LA County's juvenile justice efforts, working with our probation youths, all of our system involved youth, transitioning those young people out of incarceration, back into communities, et cetera. So this, our MBK work, our youth diversion work is all sort of a culmination of a lot of the efforts that all of us have worked on. And specifically that I worked on for the last couple of years. Also wanted to thank Cecilia, Jared, and Gina, and the whole MBK team for providing this sort of learning opportunity for MBK jurisdictions across the country. And we're really thrilled to sort of talk to you about some of our MBK efforts, our efforts specifically supporting young people in LA County with you all. Take it away, Taylor.
Wonderful. Okay, so we'll just jump right in. If I can get the PowerPoint to work. Okay, so the place we wanted to start, just to give a little bit of additional sort of context and framing. I think you probably have all gotten this sense from the way we introduced ourselves, but in LA, the work that we're here to talk to you all about, this sort of initial diversion implementation work, and the additional justice transformation work that's grown out of it, really started, like Vincent said, from a place of a focus on equity and also a focus on public health and a public health approach to reducing the harms of justice system involvement, keeping young people out of the system, out of any system, in their communities, at home, and improving well-being for young people and communities. So this slide is really just to say, why develop a public health for youth justice? Why even take that sort of approach? And for us in LA County, we took that approach because at sort of a high level of the following 3 things. We recognized that involvement in the justice system for young people was a huge disruption of healthy development. Both initial contact and continued involvement are associated with increased risk for home instability, school push-out, trauma, exposure to trauma, substance use, substance abuse, and much, much more. Involvement in the justice system itself operates as a negative health exposure. So what that means is just that even if you're just thinking about how to keep a community healthy in sort of the strictest sense, the sort of contact between a young person and their family and the justice system is itself a contributor to poorer health outcomes across a lifespan. There's more, in addition to sort of that initial negative health exposure, involvement with the justice system has exponential impact on other major determinants of health, for both young people and their families and their communities. There's a statistic here that says the odds of high school dropout, for example, are nearly doubled by a first-time arrest and nearly quadrupled by a first-time court appearance. So what that means is just that the farther a young person is pulled into the justice system, the more disrupted their life becomes, the more trauma they're exposed to, and the lower the likelihood that they will be surrounded by the other factors that keep them healthy, keep them well, factors like staying involved in school, staying connected to their community, having leadership roles in that community, all of that. And then, of course, very importantly, that involvement with the justice system is also a key contributor to inequity, that there's an inequitable burden of justice system involvement on youth of color, on families of color, just sort of evidenced by any corner of the data that you look at. You can see how truly horrendous the disparities are for youth and families of color when it comes to justice system involvement. So for all of those reasons, for us in LA, it became really a useful tool to think about justice system involvement as a public health issue, as a public health priority, and as a sort of place where we could work together to take a public health approach, meaning that we we're given this we could use this framework of looking at data to identify root causes. We could bring people together, convene collaborative review of that data, and collaborative policy and program planning. All of the good stuff that comes with a public health approach. Another really important thing that we wanted to lift up as part of that sort of general approach we took, that at every stage along the way for us, centering community collaboration, meaningful community collaboration. I lost track of all the folks who are on the call, but George, Brotherhood Crusade, is on here. Shout out to George, and others in LA who were part of our community of experts, people who helped us plan what would become the LA model for diversion and what will continue to grow into the LA model for youth development and youth justice transformation. That community has been with us from the beginning, preceded us, of course, but has been with us from the beginning, and has been a key strategy, speaking of innovative models, strategies, and tactics, running throughout all, if we could say nothing to anyone else on this call, I think our big message is engage the community of stakeholders that are in your jurisdiction, in your community, whatever that looks like for you. For us in LA, we're talking about, like Vincent said, several cities, municipalities, but very, very many communities, neighborhoods that are part of the LA County area, a huge area, and engaging the leaders in those communities, engaging people were most impacted by the justice system in those communities, strengthened our work and taught us what we needed to do in LA. This is just a quick slide I won't go into, but just to sort of share, we'll go into the process by which we developed our sort of core program model, but that process was a community-driven one, a collaborative one, and this is some of the feedback that we got at sort of the close of the first phase of that process about why that process was different than normal sort of county planning processes for the folks who were involved. And you can sort of see here, where we could have gone farther, where we could have created a better process, where we could have been more thoughtful about including voices of folks who were impacted by the system, and folks who lived in the communities that we were hoping to serve, and where we did more than had happened before, and how that was to the folks who participated. This is just quickly to say, as we launch into the sort of meat of our presentation, which is what is our model, what did we do, which is to say that we really built on decades of work, both community work here in Los Angeles and also thinking all around the world about how the youth justice system could be transformed, how it should be transformed. What you have here is an excerpt from the Annie E. Casey Foundation's Transforming Juvenile Probation report, which just shows a sort of a reflection of how we were thinking in LA, that the priority was really to transform the justice system. That was a long-term priority, and that one of the first things we could do is really do the best we could at implementing a youth diversion model that was community-led, that was, had fidelity to best practices, promising practices around the country, and that really was thoughtfully laid out. So this slide is to say, when that was our task, to think about implementing a youth diversion model. We thought about all the places along the continuum of justice system development where that could happen. We thought about, opportunities for true prevention, opportunities for diversion at each sort of moment where there are off-ramps from the justice system, this moment pre-arrest, when a young person comes into contact with law enforcement agencies, post-arrest, before a young person is sent to probation, at probation, before a young person's case is filed with the district attorney's office, and then at the district attorney's office before a petition is filed in court. And then, we're really careful to think about the fact that there are many other chances to intervene in a young person's experience with the justice system after court, but that those are really not true diversion in the sense that those don't remove a young person from justice system involvement. Those instead offer more lenient dispositions, for example, or better connections in the reentry space. They are just as important, but a lot of the work we did for the first maybe 3 or 6 months of our collaborative work together was just to continue to remind ourselves what our goals were, that our goal was really to reduce justice system involvement, to prevent it whenever possible, and that meant that we were really thinking about these earliest few moments of prevention efforts and these very early contact diversion opportunities. And in LA, just quickly, the little data points that are on the bottom of this graphic are there just to sort of gesture to the fact that as we were thinking about this together in a collaborative, we brought data to the table. Public Records Act requested the Department of Justice here in California to figure out how many young people were getting arrested each year in LA County for what, and really inform our conversations with that data about what was possible and where we could make the biggest impact, both in terms of reducing the number of youth who were arrested and processed through the justice system, and reducing the disparities by race, by ethnicity, by gender, by age, in those harms created by justice system involvement. This is quickly just a timeline to show you that what we did in terms of what the county was doing, again, building off decades of really incredible community activism and advocacy. But once the county decided to get involved in this diversion space, it took us, really about 2 years to collaboratively build, building on some of the work that Vincent was doing with My Brother's Keeper, some of the research that was happening in the Department of Public Health and in other spaces, building those relationships to the community of folks who had been doing work in the justice transformation space for decades, and starting a facilitated process of collaboration, of more focused research, and writing the recommendations for the LA model. This quickly just shows you some of those data points that we looked at. We looked at trends over time to think about the ways in which, although youth arrests went down every year following national trends, disparities, racial inequities continued to get worse each year. Each year, you see here about 62% of youth arrests or Hispanic, Latinx, but really around 90% of youth arrests every year are for youth of color, Black youth, and Hispanic, Latinx youth. And we also found, importantly here, that about 80% of youth arrests each year were legally eligible for this very early diversion. That was a huge and important finding for us as we were doing our initial research, both in the data and the statute available to us. And so that really let us run with the idea that most youth arrests should be connected, could and should be connected to community-based alternatives instead of ever being booked, being handcuffed, having data entered in a permanent criminal database, all of the things that we knew created harms that lasted lifetimes. This again just shows some of the other information that we started to gather as we really launched into this work. We know, for example, that 90% of young people, behavior that is read by systems as, quote, delinquent, really stems from unmet developmental needs, and will not evolve, in most cases, into a chronic or adult offending behavior, sort of criminal legal behavior. A diversion, therefore, can build meaningful accountability and reduce the costs, both the human and financial costs of system involvement. We see that over and over again in the literature, and that individualized case management models that connect young people to community-based youth development services are especially effective. One thing I just want to highlight before I stop talking is that what this means, it's not us really, what this means in the literature, is that in most cases, doing nothing is best approach to young people who come into contact with law enforcement. And what that means is not that we want to ignore young people's needs or their strengths, but just that over pathologizing young people, over intervening in a young person's life, in their family's life, can really be as harmful as anything else. And so when thinking about how to truly improve well-being for young people, this helped sharpen our thinking into knowing that it wasn't just that some one-size-fit-all diversion model was going to work for us. If we really wanted to be responsive to what we were learning, both from the sort of best research that was available to us at the time, and from the real expertise of youth leaders and community leaders who were in this collaborative space with us, be responsive to all of those pieces of evidence, we needed to develop a model that was flexible and individualizable. That would mean that a young person who comes into contact with law enforcement and really, just was bored that day, or is exhibiting normal adolescent poor decision-making behavior, or as in many cases, was just being discriminated against by the systems who operate in this criminal legal framework. For those young people, a quick assessment of strengths and goals and needs was going to be able to just lead to a sort of diversion plan that was as simple as being connected to an after-school art class, once or twice, or as supportive as ongoing, mental health support, really depending on the needs of that young person, so that we were doing everything we could to not over-pathologize, over-intervene, and instead building a model that could be really flexible and really responsive to young people's own lives. And then this is the last piece I'll say. This is the other piece about what we learned when we were thinking about what our model should look like, that what would help us be effective in our goals of reducing youth justice system involvement, improving outcomes for young people, was making sure that we were creating a model that was easy to use, that reduced sort of barriers to entry for the folks who were making the decision to refer to diversion, but also protected against some of the dangers of widening the net. We wanted to be really thoughtful about both not over intervening on young people who did not need to be pathologized, but also not creating a model that would mean that young people were truant from school, for example, were all of a sudden being funneled into this diversion program where their data would be collected, where there would be a program evaluation using their information. And really, we know that the best thing to do to keep them in school, to not disrupt their life with this kind of referral. And we really also, there are other goodies in here in terms of how our model shook out, like the learning that we did about the importance of restorative and transformative justice practices, the importance of ongoing collaborative oversight and clear standards, clear goals and clear standards, and then, an ongoing commitment to data and to improving over time as we learn more about what worked and what didn't work. I lied earlier when I said that was my last slide. This is really my last slide. And this is just to say that, again, the final thing we learned when we were thinking about where to prioritize, again, there are opportunities to better serve young people throughout the criminal legal system, the juvenile legal system. But for us, because of the evidence of the effectiveness, really the sort of like chance to make the biggest impact on a young person's life, we focused on this moment of pre-arrest diversion, where an officer had the opportunity to make a referral to a community-based partner before ever booking a young person, again, before ever entering their information into a criminal database, et cetera, to minimize the harms and really improve each young person's chances of surviving. And with that, I'll shut up and turn it over to Vincent.
So you don't have to shut up completely, Taylor. So to sort of continue with what I think Taylor was getting at, one of the things that was critically important to us as we sort of started this journey is that we did not want this effort to be perceived or to be seen as a government-driven effort. That we did not want community to feel as though the government was again deciding what was best for them. And so we were really intentional about making sure that it was as collaborative a process as possible. And that meant having a relatively large planning committee that met quite often, both as a larger body, but also as a subcommittee for over 6 months. There were 16 plus meetings where folk really had an opportunity to speak to those things that were most important to them from both their lived experience, their subject matter expertise, to make sure that whatever was developed was really grounded in research, but also in just the practical lives of individuals in the county. What was really critical also to us is that the representation had to be broad. We wanted community providers to be there. We wanted advocates to be there. We wanted law enforcement to be there. And most significantly, we wanted young people to be a part of this effort. We wanted them to really help guide it, to help inform what it looked like, and to really inform our thinking. And I'll just, one little anecdote that I always mention is that we were pretty sure that it was going to be a youth diversion unit or office that was developed out of this. And young people sort of pushed back against that. They said, it's great that you divert us away from the justice system, but is that it? Is that the best that the county can do in terms of really engaging with young people? And so they said, what in this new system, this new unit, this new model will help us to succeed and to thrive? And so we added the term development, or the word youth, the word development to the title of this new office. And so it wasn't just a youth diversion office, but it was also a youth development office. And I think that was directly because young people pushed back and said that diverting them away from a justice system wasn't sufficient, but that the county should be proactive and really put in resources and infrastructure that really helped them to sort of thrive and be successful. So next slide. So what is this model? This model, as Taylor touched on, is really sort of a health focused model that really says we believe that young people will do better when they have contact with the justice system if they are diverted at that earliest contact point, and that they are referred to community-based organizations, and that those community-based organizations will assess that young person, including that family, and really develop strength-based assessments that are holistic, that are individualized, and that are really based upon that young person's needs, and that are graduated in terms of the level of intensity of engagement with that young person. And so we really spent a lot of time thinking about what that model would look like, how the various parties would engage with each other, and really how do we incentivize the parties to participate. In LA County, the county does not have any direct authority over law enforcement agencies at all. There are over 45 law enforcement agencies in the county, and we don't control any of them. So we had to figure out a way of really incentivizing them to participate in this effort. And what we settled on, and with the consent and the consensus of the planning committee, is this idea of the county really contracting with community-based organizations in jurisdictions, law enforcement agencies, law enforcement jurisdictions throughout the county. And then that law enforcement agency would then partner with those community-based organizations, refer young people who are eligible for diversion to those community partners, and those community partners would be responsible for assessing and then providing whatever set of resources was determined to be necessary for that young person and for that young person's family. And then we really wanted to make sure that that assessment was a key and critical point, because we, as Taylor mentioned, we didn't want to over-pathologize the young people and provide resources that weren't necessarily appropriate for the young person or were just sort of cookie cutter. We wanted to make sure it was very specific and individualized to the needs of that particular young person, with the goal of providing those services, getting that young person connected to activities, to whatever resources he or she needed in their community, and then exiting that program. Exiting that program also meant that there was no legal tail. There'd be no data on that young person in any sort of criminal justice database, period, once, assuming there was a successful completion of that program. So again, our diversion model is a pre-arrest diversion model. But one of the things we also had a lot of conversation on in our planning committee was this idea that all young people in their contact or their touch with the justice system does not necessarily require very much interaction or engagement by formal systems, formal standardized systems, et cetera. And so we worked a lot with law enforcement to come up with sort of like 2 touch points, 2 ways in which we would engage with young people who had had some sort of contact with law enforcement, et cetera. And one that the first was really counsel and release. And so for young people whose contact was really more of an infraction, some was a status offense, truancy, things of that sort, we wanted there to be a very, very light touch. We wanted those young people to potentially be referred to services, but that there be very little follow-up, that a counseling by the law enforcement agency, maybe a counseling between the law enforcement agency, the parent, and the young person, but that would be essentially the whole programming, the whole services that would be provided to the young person, besides potentially being connected to other services that he or she might need. But there'd be no formalized referral to services. We would not be doing case management, et cetera. And that was with the thought that not all young people and their contact with law enforcement or the justice system justified these really formal, structured, pre-diversion sort of system that we were putting in place with this new office. But when law enforcement determined that the offense was significant and required a more formal touch, that we would then use our pre-arrest diversion model, where that law enforcement agency would refer that young person to a community-based partner who would do this assessment, develop an individualized case plan for that young person, and then that young person would be allowed to pursue that, to participate in that case plan, and then sort of move through the system. So I mean, I think one thing that we constantly talked about is this need for coordinating and really growing our network. One of the things that we did early on as part of our planning process was to sort of do a landscape analysis of organizations in LA County and the ones who were doing diversion work of any sort. And we discovered quickly that there were not a lot of organizations who were doing pre-arrest diversion or diversion services where they were engaging with law enforcement. A lot of agencies were doing youth development work in one form or another, but did not necessarily have a relationship with law enforcement, were not necessarily used to engaging with young people who had those sort of initial contacts with law enforcement. And so we knew that as a part of moving forward, this effort would have to include funding and capacity building for community-based organizations to support them as they sort of started this effort, those who were doing it, to sort of build their capacity, but then also to sort of expand the number of community-based organizations who could do this work. We wanted to make sure that there was expertise in community, that they understood how to engage with caretakers and with family members, et cetera, that their staff was comprised of credible messengers, individuals who could really engage and communicate with young people, that they were culturally sensitive, that they could really identify and affirm these young people, and that their assessments and that the way in which they engage with those young people were affirming. And that we also wanted to make sure that the programming that they were engaging with young people was evidence-based, and really was appropriate to the needs of the young people. And this was not something that we only thought of for community-based partners, but there was also a desire that we, in as much as possible, help build capacity amongst law enforcement agencies as well. And so implicit bias training and things of that sort have also been a part of sort of the initial rollout of this programming, so that we want to build or really transform the culture of law enforcement and really get law enforcement to think more about how they engage with young people, particularly young people of color.
And just to add quickly, to sort of highlight part of what Vincent was just speaking about, is another thing that was really important to us as we didn't say this explicitly, but in Los Angeles County, there are over 50 law enforcement agencies. So we really had this pretty gargantuan task in terms of figuring out how to build relationships with those law enforcement agencies so that we could trust that entering into a program partnership with them would not, would be sort of with fidelity to our model, that law enforcement agencies would be ready when they joined on as partners to agree not to arrest young people for alleged offenses that we had deemed, not appropriate for formal diversion, or that they would agree, for example, to refer to diversion more sort of serious alleged offenses, low-level felonies, things that some law enforcement agencies feel less comfortable with. As we were, approaching that task, we knew it would have to be a phased rollout, so that we would start with a group of 5 to 10 law enforcement jurisdictions where we knew that we had built the sort of buy-in and relationships that would make for successful programs there. As we grew and sort of showed proof of concept, the idea was that each year we would expand to about 5 to 10 additional geographic locations, additional jurisdictions. And what was really important to us in terms of growing the network of community-based leaders for this work was that we did some coordination to make sure that the community-based organizations who were being partnered with law enforcement agencies were as truly local as possible, so that we weren't, forming partnerships between a community-based organization miles and miles away in a completely different community in the county with a law enforcement agency that was picking up young people who would have had to, travel long distances, would have had to experience the great burdens, especially in our county, of traveling so many miles. And for all the reasons that Vincent just described, it was important to us that we tried to fund a network of organizations who were as local as possible and as connected to the communities in which we were hoping to start working as possible.
Thanks, Taylor. And I think that was especially critical and important given the number of services that we were expecting those community-based partners to provide. And so, part of the work of the planning committee was to really think about what services young people and families would need in order to sort of be successful and to thrive and sort of move through this relatively short engagement period and hopefully to whatever aftercare services were being provided. I mean, so the planning committee sort of came up with a set of, or a menu of services that each community-based organization was either expected to provide themselves or to identify and demonstrate an ability to identify other partners who could provide these services to young people and their families when it was shown via the assessment that those were necessary. And so we knew that mentorship, peer supports, community leadership, civic engagement, restorative and transformative justice practices, mental health services, educational services, workforce development services were all going to be necessary for some young people. And we wanted to make sure that in as much as possible, this community partner could be sort of a one-stop shop. And when they weren't a one-stop shop, that they had demonstrated relationships and partnerships with other entities in that community who could provide those services to young people. And so, as Taylor mentioned, we knew that given LA's landscape, just our geographical challenges and logistics, that this would have to be a phased rollout. And so the first cohort of community-based organizations have been identified, and they are providing services in 9 jurisdictions across the county, with the goal of rolling out 5 or 10 so more a year until we reach the entire county. And this pre-arrest youth diversion effort is a countywide effort. And we're very happy that going forward, this new Office of Youth Diversion and Development has Taylor there to sort of help lead some of the research and the evaluation efforts that are going to be really, really important to make sure that we are continually assessing equity and we're making sure that we are really hitting the sort of the measures that we want, and that where we're not, we are in a position to course correct quickly to make sure that young people are being provided with whatever resources they need so that they don't fall into our criminal justice system. And this sort of leads us into what is now turned into another incredible, unique, wonderful opportunity. And as I mentioned earlier, young people really wanted us to think about how do we help them to succeed and to thrive. That they thought it was important that the county do more to make sure they're not a part of a justice system. But they really wanted us to think about how do we make sure that they really thrive and become successful, become the very best that they can be as individuals. And so we were, the Board of Supervisors, I think, our county's Board of Supervisors really, I think, have really bought into this idea. And we were recently tasked with this idea of helping to sort of develop a youth justice, or to really reimagine our youth justice system here in LA County, and to think about what we could potentially create in terms of a new model, one that was definitely health focused, but one that was, I think, had more of a youth development focus in general. And so in August of this year, the Board of Supervisors tasked some of us with sort of looking at that, seeing how we sort of incorporate our youth diversion efforts into that, but looking a bit more holistically at a youth diversion model in general. And so we're really, really thrilled to be sort of starting this new journey of reimagining youth justice in LA County. And I mean, I think that we would not have gotten here without the sort of incredible collaborative work of many of our partners, and the sort of relationship that we've now built amongst government and community. And I think that's really helped us to get to a point where we can now think of really reimagining a whole new system here in LA County. And I guess our last slide is really how can you advance similar strategies in your jurisdiction? And we'll probably tag team this one. But I mean, I think one of the things, and I'll start, Taylor, just one of the things I think is critically important is that we really made this a true community effort, and that the community was at the table, the community owned the table, and there was really an opportunity for community's voice to be heard, and to really sort of help to move the conversation forward.
Yeah, and you know, I'm seeing the questions pop up on the chat box, and I think so many of the questions are related to some of what we tried to put in this last slide. So maybe we'll just leave this here in the discussion if anyone wants to talk about each of these pieces. I completely agree with Vincent. You know, the real takeaway, at least that we want to try to lift up, is how important it is to really build on, connect to, uplift and build on the community work that's happening in your jurisdiction if you're thinking about a similar body of work. And related to that, I just want to respond to, it looks like Alana's question. She says, how essential is government participation? If there's a government resistance to policy change, is it worth creating community-based opportunities that don't have government buy-in? I'm curious what Vincent and Refugio and others on the call would say to that. But for me, related to this, our sort of thinking about this last slide, how could this, how could you all learn from what we did and where we struggled? I think the answer to this question for me is yes, it's absolutely worth it. I think, you know, what happened in LA is just sort of the latest chapter in a story that included many, many years of government resistance to policy change. So, you know, we're speaking to you now from a time when some of the sort of policymakers, decision makers, finally listened to the community-based work, the community-led work that had been happening for years, and decided to respond to all of that work, that history of work, with some infrastructure, some funding that could try to make what had been already happening more sustainable, could try to add some capacity to it, and try to really coordinate what was already happening. So I think the answer is yes. I think the first step, I think, is figuring out how to support the community work that's already happening wherever it is that you are, and to try to continue to agitate and advocate with your local government to make sure that someone is listening to what's happening, and that someone is trying to work in sort of an inside-outside way towards a time when those two, the community work and the government work, can work together.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think, unfortunately, it takes that community building their own work and showing the efficacy of it, showing the value of it, to get some of our, policymakers and leaders to really listen and then create opportunity for this kind of a change. But I think it's so important to get to the point where government buys in, where government is supporting, and as Vincent and Taylor have both been saying, in a collaborative way with community, and not just coming in with the answer, but really working with community to identify what they want for themselves, and then putting that into play. But I think the government piece, especially when working with law enforcement, working in this space, is so important. It provides a layer of, I don't want to say protection, but a layer of a buffer, between agencies on the ground, community or based organizations, sometimes in law enforcement, when tension can come into play in these relationships, allows for some of that accountability piece to live with government rather than living with law enforcement over a CBO, which I think eases some of that tension, allows for better communication, and can lead to better outcomes overall, along with just being able to scale, right? No one can scale the way the government can with funding on the ground. Just the amount of resources that it takes to truly do this work can't truly be done without government. So all of that hard work in the community, all the hard work on the ground, advocating, getting to this point is critical.
Just quickly, I was going to add, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't mention that the philanthropic community in LA County has really been a critical partner in this effort. I mean, I think their ability to sort of fund advocacy and the work of a lot of community-based organizations to do the sort of advocacy work that was necessary to sort of prod and nudge policymakers to sort of think differently and to honestly help put in place, to elect policymakers who thought differently, has been critical, so that now we find ourselves in a position where we have policymakers who are not just who haven't just bought in, but are really champions for this type of work. And I think I agree with Refugio that at the end of the day, government has the funding to scale these efforts. We weren't interested in piloting a pre-arrest diversion effort in LA County. We wanted to have a pre-arrest diversion effort in LA County for every community, every young person in every community in LA County. And at the end of the day, that meant government had to be the critical partner in this.
And then just a little bit more, and Jared and Cecilia, let us know if you want to shift gears, but I'm just sort of looking at the other questions that have come through on the chat. Speaking of our sort of the role that we play, the role that we identified again in that collaborative, it was a question: what role should the government play in this work? Should we be heavy-handed? Should we just provide these sort of like supportive infrastructures? And we really tried to work to fine-tune what our role should be. And so some of the other questions that are related to that piece of our role that I see coming in, for example, have we entered into a memorandum of understanding with key decision makers to engage in youth justice reform? I'll speak a little bit to that, which is to say, yes, and we imagine that we will do more of that as our work expands. A reminder is that we're really in our first year of implementation. So we, like Vincent said, we didn't want to pilot and go away, but we knew we would have to launch and then learn a lot about how to improve what we'd been doing, how to refine what we'd been doing. But the first, the sort of core document that we have that outlines the model that we just spent a lot of time describing to you guys, some of the values and the related protocol that go along with those values, eligibility criteria, communication, reporting, those kinds of things, which I think are related to some of the other questions that have come in. the core document that outlines all of that and holds the parties accountable to that is a partnership agreement. In some communities, that's a memorandum of understanding. In others, it's a sort of more general partnership agreement. But between our office, the local law enforcement agency, and the community-based provider who holds a contract with us. So those are the memoranda of understanding, the partnership agreements that we have entered into. And we imagine, like I said, that there might be more. One thing that's on the top of my mind almost all the time, for example, is hopefully the possibility of refining sort of our partnership with the district attorney's office and with the court, and thinking about ways to enter into memoranda of understanding or partnership agreements with them. Related to the second question that Jordan shared, have we identified, adopted, or implemented local policies for transformation? One of the pieces, our office was launched by a policy. We sort of represent the implementation of an initial policy. One of the policies that we've put forward is a data sharing policy. But, that's sort of an internal policy. You all know the sort of levels of policy. We have an internal data sharing policy that we've shared with probation, the district attorney's office, with the courts here in LA. But we're always thinking about ways to make that internal policy even stronger. And one option that we've been considering that we have not yet done, but that we're considering in the near future is thinking about a memorandum of understanding with those sort of later justice system players. And I think, George, I see your question, but just to quickly, because it's related, go down to Elijah's question, which is about how we ensure that law enforcement does not create a case or file that would enter a young person's information into their database, their system, that would follow and negatively impact a young person in the future. This question, thank you so much for this question, Elijah. This is the big question. This is the big thing for us that we're always thinking about. One way that we've done this is even just in saying, we're a pre-arrest, we're a pre-booking model. We're flexible because not all law enforcement agencies are at that point where they can agree, yes, we'll refer all young people pre-booking. Some law enforcement agencies, just as a quick example, say, yes, we're comfortable referring most kids before booking them, which means before entering an arrest record into a database or file for XYZ cases, but for some cases we might not feel comfortable, so we want to reserve the capability to refer young people post-booking. But we really, in all our meetings, in all our partnership agreements, all our memoranda of understanding with law enforcement agencies, are consistently trying to advance this point, that our real goal is to avoid the creation of a record that can be discoverable by background check, that can follow a young person in exactly the way you described. I also, to be fully transparent, because I think it's extremely important, because this question is the big one. This is a place where we have not been able to sort of meet our ideals in every partnership yet. This is a place where we've had to make some compromises in order to get law enforcement agencies to come on board. We've done everything that we can to make sure that young people's information is as protected as possible in the instances in which it is getting created. One of the ways in which that works, for example, is even in the choice to put our office in the health department rather than in a justice agency or some other department in the county. We think a lot about statutory protections for youth data, the ways in which we can make sure that data generated by a referral to diversion is confidential and considered to be confidential in all its sort of travels through different reporting requirements. And, we could talk for an hour or two just about this, but this is a huge deal for us, and it's a place where we know we need to continue to learn about how best to protect. Even, and I think this is really the heart of your question, even the fact of a referral, right? So law enforcement agencies will make a referral, hopefully pre-booking. There's no formal permanent arrest record created, but there still is this internal, for the law enforcement agency, record of a referral to diversion, which could conceivably be read as a reason for reducing future opportunities for leniency, future opportunities for referral to diversion, for example. And that for us is a place where for now we're trying to do, like I said, as much protection as possible, but also as much training as possible, and to keep our eye on the ball in terms of what other strategies we need to approach, whether they're legislative changes or more robust and formal confidentiality policies, those kinds of things. So I just outlined a bunch of stuff we've thought about, but the real answer to your question is that we've tried in a few different ways throughout our model to reduce the likelihood of what you're describing happening, but we know we have to do better in future, learn how to do better in future, and this is really one of our main goals. I don't know if either of you has more to say on that before we go to George. There's the question that George raised, hi George, is really about, how the broad categories that we mentioned, the 10 categories of services that we're asking providers to be able to offer to young people, how every youth-serving entity might be able to claim that they provide those services, and how we ensure quality, efficacy, effectiveness of the selected organizations, how we sort of delineate standards, metrics to determine who we funded, who we will fund in future, who will continue to fund. I think, George, is part of your question. And I think I'm going to turn to Vincent and Refugio to answer this question better than I can, but I think this is another place where our answer is that we can share some of what we've done so far and also really highlight that this is a place we know we need to learn a lot more in the next couple years about how to really do this. We started from a place, like I said, of wanting to trust community-based organizations and not overburden them, but also have some very clear standards like this sort of local pairing that we mentioned, and the ability to really be well-versed in the values of restorative, transformative justice, of youth development, those kinds of things. But I'll let Refugio and Vincent say more.
I was, just real quick, we mentioned earlier that one of the things that we knew going into this is that we did not have enough capacity of community-based organizations here in LA County, and that part of the role of this new office would have to be to work to expand the number of community-based partners who could do this work. And that entailed trainings, really helping organizations to think through how they might participate and where they might partner on this effort. Because I think we knew that if we wanted to maintain a certain level of efficacy, that was going to be a process, and it was going to take a matter of years. And I think that the office, which Taylor's mentioned, has only been in existence for about 1.5 years now, has really spent a lot of time and energy, not just getting diversion programs up and running, but making sure that the program managers can work with the community-based partners to really identify strengths and weaknesses and opportunities to really sort of grow their ability to provide the services. That none of them are probably exactly where they'd want to be, and that process is probably going to continue for the next couple of years to make sure that they can sort of get to a point where they feel most comfortable. And then how do we then build upon that with the other community-based partners that are going to be coming on board as we sort of expand diversion across the county?
Yeah, and then Vincent said I think there's a couple layers in that question for us. One being around capacity building, ensuring that we're bringing things to the table that are going to help our providers build their their ability to deliver quality services to youth. I think the most important thing we've done around that is build this learning community where we're bringing our partners together on a monthly basis to talk about implementation, talk about how things are going, what challenges are coming up, share best practices, and really learn from each other so that we're creating this true community of support. And then on the back end, end of the day, we're a county entity, we're providing contracts, and we have a responsibility to ensure that we're tracking outcomes, that we are doing things like focus groups with participants to see what their experience was like. What did they really get out of the programming? Did they meet their goals? Were they able to set their own goals and really get there? Or if not, what was missing? What can be done better? So really trying to build an infrastructure around that monitoring that really feels more not like trying to find flaws, but trying to find areas of growth and working together with our partners on the ground to identify resources that help that growth.
And just sort of lastly, again, to be completely honest and transparent with all of you guys, our first solicitation, our first sort of release of our contracting process about a year ago was not ideal. We learned a lot from that process. It was not what it should have been, and we tried our best with what the sort of contracting structure that we had inherited, being a really new office, but it was not as inclusive, it was not as open, it was not as clear. Speaking, George, thank you so much for mentioning this idea of clear standards and metrics and expectations. Our first contracting process was not as clear as it should have been, and we hope that it will be better this upcoming year when we release again. Refugio and I are about to be kicked out of the room that we're sitting in. So Jared, Cecilia, I don't know if there's anything you guys want to do to wrap up. We can call in again in a few minutes, but we're going to have to walk downstairs pretty quickly.
Well, I mean, I think the biggest thing is that we would like to give you a virtual round of applause. Just so appreciative of this incredible conversation, just super useful for, the broader network to have access to a lot of the best practices and, your experience doing this work. So thank you so much for your time today. And if it is okay, I would love to connect you with folks in the Slack channel. So in the event that folks have additional questions or thoughts that they would like to share, as a next step, I can just, create space in the Slack channel to continue the conversation, if that's okay.
We would love that. Yeah.
Awesome. So it seems like folks have a lot of great questions. So I will set that up later today. And understanding that you all have to jump from the space, that's totally okay. I could just close us out with a quick survey to see how folks are feeling about our time today. And then I'll just follow up connecting us all in Slack. Does that sound
wonderful? Good? Thank you all so much. It was an honor to be in this space with you all today.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you all so much. Awesome. So I will go ahead and close us out with just a quick survey, wanting to get some feedback from you all about how they went. So I'm now sharing my screen, just 3 quick questions per usual. The first being, overall, how do you rate the quality of the learning call today? In the same format, you can respond at pollev.com/JaredBrown029. You can also text Jared Brown 029 to 22333 with the option of A, very good, B, good, C, fair, and D, poor. And overall, how do you rate the quality of the learning call today? So I'll just give it about 20 seconds. Understanding that we are running a little bit over time, so sorry about that. I want to respect y'all's time. So I'll give it about 10 seconds and then I'll move on to the next question. Awesome. So the next question, more content specific. So how useful was the content delivered during the learning call today? A, being very useful, B, somewhat useful, C, not so useful, and D, not at all useful. And again, I'll give this question about 20 seconds. Awesome. So the final question is just, would you be willing to participate in future learning calls? Awesome. So we are all set. We are now at the conclusion of our learning call. I will be sure to connect everybody with our friends out in Los Angeles via the Slack channel. And that way you'll be able to answer any additional or ask any additional questions that you may have, and look forward to seeing you all in a couple weeks for our next learning call. Thanks everybody for joining us today, and have a good one.